Hi, I am Patti Wagman, and I am very pleased to be talking to you today about understanding body image and eating disorders. I think it's important to really look at why this topic. Eating disorders has the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. So while the numbers in comparison to other mental illnesses are lower, the prevalence is lower, they're deadlier. The most recent statistics will tell us that there are 1 million people in Canada who have been diagnosed with an eating disorder. So it's predominantly female, but there are a number of males who also suffer from eating disorders. Sometimes that's a myth that people believe this only impacts women. That's not true. 50% of teenage girls and 33% of teenage boys have participated in some sort of weight loss activity, an unhealthy weight loss activity. So it might be things like fasting or vomiting, even smoking cigarettes. A lot of times when people will start smoking, one of the things that they will quote as their reasons to not stop smoking is the fear of weight gain. Smoking is an appetite suppressant. 35% of I'll say normal dieters can progress to pathological dieting. And of that 35%, 20 to 25% progress to partial or full syndrome eating disorders. So that's really significant. Children with eating disorders can become medically unstable very rapidly. When we move into talking about what are some of the things that you can look out for when you have children and youth in your life that you might be concerned about, it's really important to jump on this early. Poor body image can lead to other disturbances in our relationship with food. It can lead to disordered eating, maybe not necessarily full-blown eating disorders, but disordered eating, and other mental health concerns. If we don't feel good about who we are, that leads to low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, etc. I think that it is important for us to survey our own personal beliefs and biases. None of these questions, there's no right or wrong, there's no judgment attached. It really is just a way to reflect on how do we feel about some of these questions that I'm about to ask you. So again, none of these questions have judgments attached to them, but I'd like you to kind of tap into how did some of those questions make you feel? Were there some that were more uncomfortable than others? Were there some that you could just kind of brush off? What I want to illustrate with these questions is that we all have some sort of relationship with our bodies. Sometimes that's more positive than other times. And as we go through our conversation today, I want you to reflect on what sorts of things do influence that relationship that you have with your body. When we look in the mirror, what do we see? Do we see ourselves the way other people view us? Many people that I've worked with who have body image issues see themselves in a very distorted way, very, very differently than their loved ones see them. What are the feelings that we have about the way we perceive ourselves? What beliefs do we have about ourselves based on our perceptions and how we feel? Do we have beliefs around people would like me more, or I would be more successful. My life would be better if I were thinner, bigger, stronger, more toned. Whatever that belief system is, how does that drive our relationship with our body? And then all of that combined leads to behavioral. So in what ways do we behave based on our thoughts, feelings, and perceptions? So does it influence things that we would do or not do? For instance, do we avoid going swimming because we don't want to be seen in a swimsuit? What are some of the associations that we have in our culture between thin versus fat? This is the common things that people will come up with if you ask them to describe people who are thin versus people who are overweight. And when you look at the list, it becomes very clear how much more positive the words are for thin versus fat. That also impacts the relationship that we have in our body. If we're getting messages constantly from the world around us that being a specific way is good versus being a different way is bad, that's absolutely going to make it more difficult for us to feel good if our bodies don't fit that ideal. There are some cultures that the ideal body is a larger, curvier, rounder shape. That tends not to be the ideal in our Western culture. And so that's going to have an impact on whether you fit that ideal and how you feel about yourself versus if you don't. Gender, I've already alluded to the fact that eating disorders especially impact more women than men. Definitely both genders are impacted. Our society does tend to have sort of strict ideals for each gender. If you think about what is the ideal that is seen in our media for women versus men, it's quite different. And again, if a person doesn't fit those gender ideals, what impact does that have? The body talk that we have for ourselves, the things that go on in our own minds, that is going to influence our relationship with our bodies. It also is going to influence the way our children view their bodies, because it's one thing to say to children, you're beautiful and I love you and you're perfect the way you are. But if you turn around and degrade your own body and talk about your own body in a negative way, that has far more impact. Kids will pick up on that. So we have to be really, really careful about the messages that we give about our own bodies, about other people's bodies, because kids soak that up. Fashion, which might sound like kind of a weird thing to influence our bodies, but it has a big impact. If you look through the years at what different fashions have been, it absolutely determines what sort of body is deemed the ideal. For instance, Marilyn Monroe, back in the 50s and even into the early 60s, she and other actresses and models of her time were considered the ideal. It was a voluptuous look. It was a curvy look. And then a model came on the scene in the mid-60s named Twiggy. And she got her name because her nickname fit her body type. And that shifted not just the fashion world, but what became kind of the ideal, the body type that women were striving for. And for most people, that's a really unattainable body shape. I have a little video here that kind of leads us through what some of the changes in fashion have been over the years. Pay attention to how does the way that people are wearing the clothes, the degree of modesty, how does that influence the type of body shape that is portrayed within the little clips as the ideals. That are really important to get across to youth are understanding things like body types, recognizing that we each are wired up genetically very differently. And like I mentioned, Twiggy has a very specific body type. If you are not that body type, you are never going to look like Twiggy. And so understanding the types of different bodies, how puberty affects the bodies. This one is huge because a lot of times body image issues begin right around the time that puberty is starting. It is very natural for children to gain a considerable amount of weight in puberty right before a growth spurt. Just as it is with toddlers. When you look at a toddler and they seem to be putting on a lot of weight, you can guarantee there's a growth spurt coming. It's the same with puberty. And what often happens is that weight gain becomes very distressing for the child and often for the parent. If you can recognize that that weight gain is essential to provide the energy for the growth spurt that's about to happen. Okay? Kids need to understand that. Genetics plays a huge role, and the metabolism that each of us has. We want kids to understand that leading an active lifestyle is healthy, but we want them to do so in a way that's fun for them. We don't want it to be a chore. We don't want them to have activity just as a means of managing their body size, that it should be a joyful activity. We want them to develop critical thinking skills, looking at much of what we've already started talking about today. Where do some of these attitudes come from in terms of body image and our cultural norms? Looking at the impact that the messages of others have on the way we feel about ourselves. Really important to make children aware of the media and to become media literate. Dissect ads with kids. Have kids notice as you're waiting in line at the grocery store, instead of them looking at the candy bars, divert their attention over to some of the magazine covers, looking at how many magazine covers are advertising diets and querying, why is that? Why does every magazine have to have something on there telling women that their body size isn't good enough? And almost always there will be the ad or the headline for the diet right next to or in close proximity to some ad or picture or headline for some decadent recipe. And so helping kids kind of look at those two things and say, well, isn't that in contradiction of each other? This one is telling us there are things we shouldn't be eating, and then this one is saying, oh, we should be having all of these lovely cakes and cookies and things. So just beginning to get them to question the things that are out there in the media. Having them also look at the impact that jokes and put downs and name calling, apart from, all of the bullying prevention stuff that we do, we've thankfully moved to a place where jokes about somebody's gender and ethnicity and race, people will say those are not acceptable. But yet somehow it still seems to be okay to joke about somebody's body size or make comment. I asked you earlier when we were surveying our beliefs, the comments that we make about people's weight loss. I would venture to say it is never okay to comment about somebody's body. It's such an intimate, personal thing. Just to look at what is the underlying message there. When I say to somebody, have you lost weight? You look fantastic. It kind of says you didn't look so fantastic before. How does that then make the person feel about themselves? And if they were to regain the weight, which research will tell us 95% of diets don't work, if they regain that weight, how many people have told them how great they look at this weight and implied they didn't look so great over here? So what kind of impact do comments about other people's bodies, how does that make them feel? People come in all different kinds of body sizes and shapes, and that's okay, just to be accepting of that. It's not uncommon to hear somebody say, oh, I feel so fat. Oh, I'm feeling fat today. What I point out to people when I hear that comment, actually fat isn't a feeling. Happy is a feeling, sad is a feeling, mad is a feeling. Fat isn't a feeling. When somebody says, I feel fat, that is code for something deeper. There's something beneath that comment. If someone were to say to me, oh, I feel fat today, what's the automatic response that almost all of us have? How would you respond to that? Probably we would immediately go to trying to make them feel better through comments about their appearance. Then the person will respond to that. Again, how do you think the person is going to respond? 9 times out of 10, it's going to be to double down. Oh no, like look at this roll, or look at the, and really become now entrenched in the focus on themselves as being fat. So I challenge you, the next time you hear somebody say this, rather than responding with a comment about their appearance, dig deeper. So if the person says, I feel fat, ask them something like, when did you start feeling that way? What was going on when you felt that? Is there something going on in your life? Other things that are making you feel that way? Look at what is driving. I feel fat is code for something else. There's a whole long list of what it could be, but you're never going to find that out unless you break the code. You start to have a conversation rather than entrenching them in their distorted belief. I have a short little video that kind of gives you a few very sort of quick tips that I think kind of summarizes much of what we've been talking about and gives you a bit of a road guide, I guess.